Culturally responsive teaching, what is it? In this era of DEI, exclusions, and reductions, the field of education and teacher educators are wondering, how do we meet the needs of a culturally diverse classroom? As a teacher educator, someone who teaches teachers how to teach, my question is about culturally responsive teaching in the classroom as a method and an idea. Culturally responsive teaching is the idea that students bring with them unique cultural strengths to the classroom. And when teachers recognize and respond to these strengths, then we are able to increase our learning outcomes and the sense of belonging students feel in the classroom. Although this has become a popular theory and method of practice, I wonder, as a teacher educator, do my pre-service teachers, do they feel that culturally responsive teaching was a method and an idea necessary for them to feel successful in their placements? Come with me as we join our pre-service teachers in a focus group, an oral history collection of what their experiences were like in their teaching internship to discover what role, if any, that culturally responsive teaching played in their teaching experience.
All right. Well, thank you all for being here today. As you all know, I am a teacher educator, teaching assistant professor of social studies at the University of Arkansas. And I, in other words, teach teachers how to teach social studies. And I have had the privilege of having you all in my classes, as well as serving as your director of internship this past year, or as your direct supervisor in your internship. And something outside of my teacher education, I am also a researcher. And the type of research that I engage in is oral history. And oral history is this practice of talking with people who have lived through specific points in history that right now may not be history, but in the future will become a part of historical record or historical memory and how we think about certain phenomena. And so I wanted to focus group with you all today, now that you've successfully completed your internships in English and social studies and world languages. I love the diverse mix that we have here, because I'm wanting to understand from your perspective as pre-service teachers, if you felt culturally responsive teaching was a practice that you used at all in your internship. Was it necessary? Did you use it at all? And if so, how did you use it? And the purpose of this research, what we'll be doing with it is, teacher educators, one thing that we do not know is if our pre-service teachers that then go to become in-service teachers know what culturally responsive teaching is, know if they're doing it, or feel that they're doing it well. And so you all, again, coming off your internship, are in a unique perspective and position to answer this question, especially at this important historical moment where diversity and equity and inclusion has been a big question about if it's necessary in our teacher toolbox. So your answers will be recorded, and it will be recorded for fidelity purposes as a researcher. So as I'm writing it up, that I'm not mischaracterizing or misquoting anything that you might say, that I have it, in a transcript, what you've said in your testimony regarding it, but also that it would become later a part of an archive of oral histories about this specific time period in our educational history. Again, this is completely voluntary, and you can withdraw your participation at any time and say, hey, you know what? I'm done with this for the day. I got to go, Dr. Connor, and log off, or just log off if you ever decide that you want to do that. Again, you always have the right to withdraw your participation. With that being said, do you all have any questions or concerns before we get started? All right. Okay, so culturally responsive teaching is this idea that if teachers were to learn their students' cultures and backgrounds, that they respond to them in their relationship building, their teaching, that teachers can take this information, their knowledge about their students, to use them as strengths in the classroom. So And thinking of culturally responsive teaching and your internship, did you ever have to acquire knowledge about your students' cultures or backgrounds to be successful in your internship? Trevor P.
Yeah, I feel like that was something I did have to do quite often this semester to be successful.
You did have to use it.
Yes.
In what way?
So I was at Georgia Junior High School, and the community there is very Latino heavy and even Marshallese heavy. So
Mm,
I feel like I had to do a lot of learning about their culture, so that way I could make the lesson plans more suitable for the cultures that I was less aware of.
huh. Okay. Thank you. How about you, Cecilia H?
I agree. I feel like I used it a lot. I was in Rogers too, so they have a large Hispanic population, but even others as well. They have Marshallese and a ton of other communities. And so, like, they have a big multicultural family day and assembly. And so, even that, when all the students came out and like represented each of their different countries and origins and just cultures, for me, that was a big learning moment, but also something that I used to implement within my own lessons and like in the classrooms as well. Because a
Mm,
big thing for me was like when they were writing specifically like for English, the things they would write about would be things related to their background. And so like right now, one of the big things that's like going on, you know, in the country, a lot of students were concerned about that and like writing about that. And for some of the days, they didn't show up for school for certain reasons as well.
very interesting. Okay. I like the range of experiences that you had there. It's definitely impactful. Olivia, how about you?
I had a similar experience, but the I was at Rogers New Tech this semester, and the majority of my students there were like had a Latino or a Hispanic background. And I share that culture with them. And so I think it came really easily to me because I knew where they were coming from and I'd experienced similar things. But I think if I didn't have that experience with that culture, then I would need to like learn how to connect with students in that way. But since I like spoke the same language as most of them or just had experiences growing up similar to what they were going through, then I didn't have to necessarily quote unquote work as hard to like um I guess meet them where they're at with that. But I think again, if it was any other culture, then it would have been a really different experience since I'm not as familiar with any other culture.
Mm. As a follow up, so like you had this connection, cultural connection with Hispanic or Latino students. What about like your connections or learning about white students or any Black students or Marshallese students? Did you have to kind of adapt or acquire any of their cultural language or wealth to kind of build
Mhm.
relationships with them?
I did to an extent. The majority of our student population is Hispanic, and then I feel like the rest of the population is mostly white at the school I was at. I personally, at least to my knowledge, didn't have any students that were like Black or Marshallese or from any other
Mm.
culture. But I also am familiar with like white culture because that's also part of my background. And so I just was very blessed in that I knew kind of both sides of where my students were coming from. But again, I would have had to adapt in a lot of ways if I wasn't as familiar with where they were coming from.
Mm-mm-mm. So all of you felt that you, in some way, were interacting with the cultures of your students at your schools. So my next question is like, well, how would you define for yourself a culturally responsive teaching as a practice?
I think something that came up a lot for me was the large majority of my students, they like their parents worked really long hours. And so we had a project where instead of them presenting in the classroom to us, they like were going to go home and present to their parents or whoever they lived with and film it. And then that was going to be their like oral communication points
Mm.
for the project. And I think that I experienced a lot of not challenges, but just like it didn't go the way I expected it to go because a lot of students were like, I don't ever like I see my parents on the weekends and I don't see them during the week and I didn't have time to do it. And I had to like basically kind of scratch everything that I had planned to be like, okay, well, you can present to me or you can present to like my mentor teacher or someone else in this building and they can do the rubric for you. And so I think there were things that even though I was familiar with like their culture or maybe what their home life could look like, it looked differently than my home life looked like growing up, even though I shared that culture with them. And so just being like open-handed was a really big thing of like, okay, I have this plan and I have to adjust it in an unexpected way, which was a good thing because then I got to just meet my students' needs in that way because if I hadn't been as flexible, then they would have just like gotten a 0 for that part of the project. So I think cultural responsive teaching for me this semester was a lot of just like flexibility and learning as I go and building connections with students because if I hadn't built those relationships with them, then they wouldn't have been as comfortable to be like, hey, like I couldn't do it because my parents were at home or hey, I was out of town because of so and so family issue. And so I think that also came back to like me actually spending time like sitting at the tables with my students, getting to know them. So then when it comes to schoolwork, we can actually figure something out for them.
Yeah. Oh, wow. That's really powerful. Like, because it took a vulnerability and a relational vulnerability for your students to come back to you and say, hey, this doesn't work for my home life. And then it took some vulnerability for you as the teacher to say, okay, I'm going to change this in a way that's going to still accommodate the requirements and the rigor of the assignment, but that also will accommodate your life and your home life. And so you were able to, in that moment, and just sending the rubric home to students, you learned a lot about their home life and what were the limits and the possibilities of your curriculum.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Trevor, how about you?
Yeah, it's pretty similar for me. I think it's just about being sensitive and aware of the possibilities of what their at home life could be. So for example, the unit I did teach in my internship, I was teaching like vocabulary with family members, and I think that's just a topic that I had to be just aware of, that the at home lives of the students I'm working with may not be, like the at home life that I experienced. It could be very different, whether there's maybe family members that aren't present or things like that. It's just being aware that my experiences with my family can be very different from, any of the students that I'm teaching their experiences at home. So being aware of that and just having that open mind that when I'm teaching about these family members, that's a possibility for them. So just being aware of that. And like the final project we did for that class was they were going to create like a family tree. And what we did was we made it so that they could either do their own family if they wanted, but they could also do a family of their choice. So that way, if there was some stuff going on at home, they wouldn't have to feel like that pressure of, just the pressure that can bring if they're forced to talk about their real family, because there may just not be some things that they know, so.
That's really good. I hear humility in there as well, that you're learning to divorce your experience and your home life from informing everything that you do, and you're giving your students a room to inform how you do business, how you teach and build relationships. I really like that. Cecilia, how about you?
For me, a big thing was just kind of like that student voice and like allowing space for different perspectives. So I feel like a big thing with like students from different backgrounds, like letting them be authentic. And when they come in with writing specifically and like literature, is making sure that what we read, what we see is showing different backgrounds and different voices so they can see themselves in those writings. But also when they write, allowing that to be like themselves, I guess, because a lot of times I feel like in writing we're like, hey, here's this set text, write about it, instead of letting them come like authentically when it comes to writing and using their voice. So just creating opportunities for them to have that opportunity. And also just a big thing for me is like the representation aspect of like with reading and literature is like, what are they reading throughout this semester? Is this, and even like if it's not just the population of like in Rogers, there is a large Hispanic population, and there may not be as large of a Marshallese population, but it's like we should still be including those voices, even if it's not just a representation of what the demographics are. It should go beyond that because it's still important for them to, be more empathetic and understand other people's experiences and understand different cultures, regardless of that. And so for me, a lot of that is like allowing for student voice, but also the like text or curriculum that reflects them versus like ones that they can see into other perspectives, essentially. Right. Yeah, it's a saying. I've heard it before, but essentially doing that as well. For me, that's what it's about.
I love that. So this idea of representation, yes, windows versus mirrors.
Yeah, yeah, that's
what allow readers to see and understand experiences, cultures, and perspectives that are different from their own. Mirrors represent books that reflect the reader's own experiences, identities, and perspectives. So this idea that you kind of need windows and mirrors, right? So I love that you guys are being both of those things, windows and mirrors for your students. I kind of hear that in all of your testimonies here. And I'm going to stop kind of interjecting as much, but let me ask you this question. Do you think you would have been successful without culturally responsive teaching? Or at first, do you feel you were successful in your internship? And if not, or if so, was it due to how did culturally responsive teaching play a role in that?
For me, I feel like it did help because we only took like one class on it like 2 years ago. So it's kind of hard to remember. I think for me, the biggest thing is that I am Hispanic and from that background. So I kind of already knew that going in. But as far as I feel like if it would have been in a different population and demographic that I am unfamiliar with, I don't think I would have been as prepared as I could have been. I think there definitely needs to be more than just one class that we take like early on, and it needs to be more incorporated throughout the 4 years. So I could have been, because of the demographics, I was fortunate that I was able to know, like I am in a lot of white spaces all the time, so I know that. And then my background is Hispanic and Latino, so I knew that going in. But if it would have been in a predominantly Black area or Marshallese area or a different demographic, I feel like I would have been somewhat more unprepared. I'm still grateful that we had the course, but I just don't think it would have been sufficient for me to be as productive as a teacher because it was only like one class. But I do think it helped.
Thank you, Cecilia. Trevor, how about you?
Yeah, I feel like it was a big help in feeling successful just with the makeup of the community. I feel like it allowed, because I'm white and that's predominantly my background. So while I couldn't necessarily like relate or connect with them in some of the ways, I was still able to learn. And I think that just that open-mindedness and being aware of that and having a little bit of background knowledge in what like CRT is helped me with that. And I do agree with what she was sharing, that I do wish there was a little bit more like classes or just opportunities to learn about it and how I could implement that into my future classroom. I think that would help a little bit more, but I think at least having that basic background knowledge of it definitely helped and feeling success this semester.
Thank you, Trevor. Olivia, how about you?
I resonate a lot with what Cecilia was talking about, just like the large majority of the students I was interacting with this semester came from the same culture that I come from, so it was really comfortable for me. But I also took the like cultural responsiveness class last semester, so it was definitely a lot more fresh on my mind. And I think that would be really, like, at least from what the other two participants here talked about, like that would be really helpful if people like I don't know, somehow couldn't take that class until right before their internship, because I do think that it was really helpful. And even though I didn't necessarily draw on everything that we learned about in that class, I do feel more prepared. And I do remember like talking to my mentor teacher about like unearthing joy and like the book that we read. And I really enjoyed that. I really enjoyed that class. And I do think that I gleaned a lot from it. Oh, can y'all still hear me?
Yes.
Okay. But again, I do think that a lot of what I like drew from this semester was more personal experience than like, oh, I read about this or I learned about it or had a discussion about it. So I do think it was very useful. But I'm having a hard time, like, I guess, separating what is like, oh, I have experience here versus, oh, I learned about this. Because in my brain, it's all just kind of like, oh, well, now it's just knowledge that I have. So yeah, very valuable. I think that my like demographics from this semester had a big impact on how much I feel like I actually took from like the curriculum of the class.
Thank you. So how do y'all feel like your experiences would have been different? Like, so you spoke about how you had to have flexibility and to consider mirrors versus and windows in your curriculum. How do you think your experience would have been different if you did not have access to any culturally responsive practices and you just kind of like were very cut and dry and rigid about how you built relationships and did your teaching? Do you think your experience would have been different? Yes, Trevor.
Yeah, I feel like the first thing that comes to my mind is I think it just would have made it a lot harder to create like a positive rapport and just a like a healthy classroom environment if I came into it or if I did go into it with like a lot more of a closed mind, you know, and just not having that knowledge or that awareness. And I think that just it makes it a lot harder, or it could have made it a lot harder to connect, or even to try to connect with the students if I wasn't even, you know, aware of their culture in that sense.
Thank you. Olivia?
Can you restate the question one more time just so I know what I'm answering?
How do you think your experience would have been different if culturally responsive teaching was not a part of your teaching toolbox? Like if, say, it was banned or you weren't allowed to use it or you didn't know about it. How do you think that would have impacted you as a teacher and maybe your students' learning outcomes?
Okay. Yeah. I think that without that knowledge, or even like we had so much great curriculum in that class, but I think the most that I remember from taking that class is the discussions that I had with my peers and getting to hear different perspectives, because most of them were things that I had never dealt with or things that I never experienced. And I think that opened my eyes up a lot before my internship to like, well, people have like, even on my own campus, people have drastically different experiences. And how much more is that true for like high school students that have really hard home situations or just come from really tricky backgrounds who like walk into school and may not be known for who they are. And so I think that it opened my eyes a lot to like, okay, well, I'm interacting with these students every day, and yeah, we like have fun and we laugh, but if I don't really know where they're coming from, then like what good? I think like having a good relationship can only be based on like surface level conversations to a certain extent. Like me actually taking the time to get to know my students took it that much deeper, and built an environment of just like inclusivity. And I think that was something I noticed from the beginning of my semester to the end, just like the shift in culture, which was really cool because I did like work really hard to make sure that that was created in my classroom. But I think that without culturally responsive teaching or just being exposed to different perspectives, I would have been really naive to the different places my students were coming from, even like the fact that I also am familiar with those cultures and how drastically different my students' experiences were within that culture, I think says a lot, because I could have been like, oh, I'll be so prepared, like I'm familiar with this. But I still wasn't all of the time. So it makes me sad to think about not having that experience and that class and that exposure, if you will, before heading into such a diverse space where I have so much like authority, because you could really easily mishandle that authority, and that would be such a bummer just for students and not really be heard in that way.
Mm-hmm. Mishandling that authority. I want to come back to that. That's interesting.
Cecilia, how about you?
For me, one of the things I agree with that. I feel like I would have been very unprepared, but also I don't think I would have been as effective. I don't think I would have been able to build the relationships and teach them in the way that I did if I had not had any background in culturally responsive teaching. But I think another thing too is it is super important when, you obviously have diverse school districts or diverse demographics. But one of the things that I've thought about like recently is it's equally important to do it even when it's not. Like even if all of your students are I went to Bentonville, so like it's a completely different demographics.
Yeah.
And so even with that, it's still just as equally important to incorporate those things. And even within one racial or ethnic demographic, there's still diversity. Like there's still different backgrounds, different needs, different experiences within that. One of the things, like even for Rogers, is like the Hispanic population. Some are first gen, some are immigrants, some are second generation, some come from low income backgrounds, some do not. Like even within that, and then even between like what type of Hispanic, where's their origin from? Are they from El Salvador? Are they from Mexico? Like even within one demographic in a way, it's still super diverse and can be broken down more. So I feel like a lot of times people think like, oh, I go to an all white private school or I go to a majority this school. Like there's no need for culturally responsive teaching or to talk about these things. But I think if anything, like it's needed even more because they've not had that experience or exposure to other cultures or other people outside of kind of that similar demographic. So it's just equally as important to incorporate that. I was doing presentations between both school districts on the U of A. So I was going to Bentonville schools and Rogers schools. And like even within that, like the way that students would be like, oh, this is different versus some that had that lived experience. So it wasn't something new when I talked about it. But I think it's important for everybody to have that training and also to implement it in the classroom, regardless of demographics, just because I think it builds more empathy and more caring. And I think it's just good teaching, honestly. Like, I think it's just good teaching to get to know your students and to teach them, that there's other experiences outside of your own.
Yes, I love that you draw upon this idea that culture is everywhere and within every context and with every group of people, that every place that we go to has a culture. There's so many churches here. Each one has a different culture, even if they are homogeneous in race, so it's about the people that are there and the ways in which they are practicing the ethic of care and relationship with one another. So I love that all of you are really thinking this way. But did you in your internship see teachers who were not using culturally responsive practices? And if so, what was your perception of their teaching style and how their students responded to their teaching? And if not, we can totally skip this question. I'm gonna give you some wait time though. Yes, Cecilia.
As far as the teachers in the school, I didn't see very many. A lot of them were very dedicated and very committed to it, which I think was very intentional on the administrators' part because they know the type of demographics they have and they know the type of student population. For my school specifically, there is really high rates of poverty. There is a lot of first generation students. So they know that going in, which was nice on the administrator's part. When I talked to them, they're like, yeah, we try to find teachers who, understand that. And so that was for the most part what I saw. For me, the biggest thing was people within my own cohort, like pre-service teachers. Like when we'd come back together and kind of talk about our experiences, some of them would kind of talk about certain things in a certain way, and I'd be like, oh, that's like kind of like that's not culturally responsive, or like that's. But my main thing was like that's kind of insensitive, because of where they were at, and a lot of them were either in Springdale or Rogers, or even not, like they were in Farmington or Fayetteville. And the way they would talk about certain students who were second language learners or had special needs, or it was a co-taught class, or they were from a minority background, and like just the frustration of like they can't learn, or they won't listen. And I don't know, like in that way I was just like, whoa, like that was kind of more a little bit discouraging. So I'm like, all of us are about to be teachers, like we're all about to go enter this workforce. And for the most part, like most of them were really informed and like really wanting to practice like culture responsive teaching, but there were a few that were like, why can't they just get it? And kind of like that frustration of like they just don't care, they won't listen. And then like they'd say all these things about them, and I'm like, you within that same sentence you just said that they're having this trouble, or they're struggling with this, or and I'm like, but then you also just complained about it. So it's kind of like, how do you, I don't know, like it was just kind of like conflicting. It's kind of sad, honestly, because I was like, I don't like, there's nothing really to fit. And like sometimes they would like brag about it. They're like, yeah, my students are gonna hate me. Like I'm a strict teacher. Like I don't care what's going on. Like this better be turned in. And I was like, whoa, okay. So it's just very different because that's not what I've seen in a lot of the schools that I've been in, and it's also not what I've seen with the majority of like my classmates who are all about to graduate. So it's just something that was kind of a different perspective of like not wanting to kind of be flexible, I guess.
Yeah.
I love that you brought that. One, you gave us insight to the schooling context that you were in, but also our teacher education program and how your pre-service peers are perceiving culture responsive teaching. I think that's actually more important than what you may have experienced in this one teaching internship for a couple months. So I really like that. And I hear this lack of flexibility, and really a lack of a growth mindset to really accommodate to whatever needs the students may have. And so you hear this blame game of where they're blaming the students, but then on the opposite end, they're releasing themselves from the responsibility of doing good teaching. Very good. Very insightful. Any other comments on this question, or we'll move forward?
Could you repeat it one more time?
Yeah. How do you think, did you, in your internship or in your classes with your other pre-service teachers, did you notice at all anyone who was not using culture responsive practices? And if so, what were kind of like their experiences with their students?
Yeah, I can share. So I mean, part of the internship was like going to observe some other teachers. So I went to observe an ELD teacher, English Language Development, because we have a good amount of population at the school that like knows very little to even like know English. So that was kind of for students who needed that help and that support in their English. And I just feel like she wasn't like, I don't know, it's like a lack of empathy for the fact that they are learning English, and it's hard, like it's a hard language to learn, and I just feel like she was just, I don't know how to describe it, but I just could feel that was creating like a division between her and the students, and just the classroom environment was very, I just feel like she didn't have much control over her students. And I feel like, or if I wonder if it was because of that lack of cultural awareness, so.
That's good. I like that. Thank you so much. The division in the classroom stuck with me. Olivia, how about you?
There was one teacher that I taught economics. There was a different teacher, not my mentor teacher, that also taught a section of economics. And this teacher only taught like one econ class, and I taught 4. And his mindset was just like, and I like observed him some, I interacted with him a lot since he also taught econ, but his mindset was very much just like, here is an entire project that lasts a month, and I'm going to give my student all of the information at once, and I'm not going to break it up, but it's like, here's all 10 assignments you have to do. You have the next month to work on it. And then he's like hands off. And I have overheard a lot of students just talking about like how frustrating that class is and how boring it is and how annoying it is. Because he just kind of gives them everything and doesn't say like, oh, well, there's just no application of like, we're going to learn how to do our taxes, and here's why it wouldn't be important. And here's where taxes started and why were taxes important. How did we get to where we are now? Like, are there people that pay taxes that aren't represented in the vote? Things like that, which is what I worked really hard to make sure I was doing. Was like, okay, at face value, econ is just kind of like numbers and statistics, but I worked really hard to try and make some connection with everything that we were doing, whether it was taxes or insurance or the global economy, like whatever that was. And my students were very successful in like picking up on it and applying it like 2 months later after we'd finished a unit or whatever the case is. But I just saw like kind of a lack of, from this teacher, I saw just a lack of like effort to make those connections with students, which led to those students just being really apathetic and being really annoyed because it's a class required for graduation. So they're all just like, I have to do it. I have to pass. But it's just like painstaking and time consuming. Whereas, yes, some of my students, of course, were like annoyed because they had to do work in my class. But my mentor teacher and I worked really hard to make sure that it made sense why we were learning the stuff that we were learning. So it's kind of like a lack of cultural responsiveness, but also just lack of like actually making what could be a boring class relevant to students.
Yeah. I what I hear is that there's like the teachers are not providing scaffolds as a resource for the students to move from stage and phase of learning to learning. And so even in Trevor's story, I hear, this element of leaving, and even Cecilia's with the pre-service teachers, of leaving students to their own devices. Like, you should just know this. You should just get this. You should just have these learning resources already. And I should just provide the structure or provide the requirement, and you should be able to meet the requirement without having to introduce any teaching, any resources. Cecilia, yes.
On the flip side that I just thought of right now, is that sometimes people misinterpret or kind of think about like what culture responsive teaching is. Because one of the things that I have seen is, in an effort to be, empathetic and responsive to the needs of students, sometimes some of the teachers with the best intentions in a way don't challenge their students or lower expectations for them, thinking that they're doing it to be culturally responsive or because they want to help them. And so like at my school, some of the other teachers who have predominantly first-gen students or Hispanic students or second language learners, and understand like, hey, a lot of these kids work, or a lot of these kids have a lot going on, or they have a lot more need in a way, they need more support. Instead of kind of upholding that rigor or challenge, they're like, you know what, let's just take it away because they can't do it, right? And so it's kind of, and again, like talking to them like they do it because they're trying to be in a way culturally responsive and understand the needs, but at the same time, like that doesn't mean lowering the expectations, or because then it's kind of just saying that they can't do it, and then you're the one putting the stop to their growth before they can even have the opportunity to try. And so that's kind of the other thing, like on the flip side, is they have like the best intentions and they're like, oh, we care about our students so much. We know they have all these things going on. And I'm like, that's great, but you still need to hold them to the same standard, and you still need to be challenging them and helping them grow and learn, instead of they can't do it because they don't speak English, or they can't do it because of this. And I'm like, I understand that you're trying to make this easier in a way because you want to meet them where they are, but you also need to be challenging them at the same time. So kind of even that, like clarifying what that is that doesn't mean like just lowering expectations or letting everybody get get an A, but also it's more of how do you get them there of, okay, they don't speak English right now and they can't write an entire essay. That's fine, but how do I get them there? Like, what are the steps that I'm going to take to get them there instead of just they can't do it?
That's really good. Yeah. Has anybody been guilty of that here? Doesn't sound like it. But if you have been, this is a good place for reflection and thinking about how you might do things differently. So I'll hold space for that just for a moment. And then I'll get to my last question. Okay. So what I heard in this last conversation was this idea about resources, awareness, and student needs. My question for you all, last question, is do you feel like advocacy is related to culturally responsive teaching practices? Like, do you feel like teachers have to play the role of advocate or activist in the classroom or in the school setting or even in the community on behalf of your students to be responsive to their needs? Cecilia.
100%. So I was actually just talking about this with one of the teachers the other day, and it blew my mind because I never thought about teaching as advocacy or like good teaching, at least as advocacy, until this teacher told me about it because I was asking her about her students. And again, because the school I'm at does have a lot more poverty and a lot more first-gen students, that comes with a lot more barriers to education. So we were kind of talking about higher education because she was working with seniors. And a big thing that she was telling me is, I'm like, I've been to all 5 English teachers for seniors, and you have been the one that kind of stuck out the most. Like, and I can't put my finger on it. Like, I don't know what it is, but just like the commitment and dedication that you have to these kids, like you're going up and beyond just, what the curriculum is. And then she told me, she's like, it's because a big thing for me is like, we need to be advocates. And I was like, whoa, mind blown. Like, I never even thought of that. Like, that's exactly what it is. Because a big thing is like, for a lot of first-gen students especially, it's hard to navigate college processes because, if their parents didn't go to college, counselors are overworked. It's really difficult to be like, hey, just apply to college, And so a big thing we were talking about with that is if they don't have that advocating for them, like, hey, we need workshops at this school, or hey, the students need someone to do like a step-by-step, or, the application fees, we need waivers, we need these things. Because especially for students who do have a lot more challenges, whether at home or just in the school, it's scary to like be the one to come out and ask for help or to, especially because by the time, especially like in high school, they've already been shot down so many times. So they're kind of just like, I'm not going to ask for help. And so she was telling me like that's happened. Like some of them go to the counselor, they're like, hey, I really need help. And they're like, you should know how to do that. It's like, okay, well then. And that's the last time they ask for help. So kind of being the one to be like, hey, this is what students need, both for the school and for the resources and like what they can do to better support them, but also just in general, like if something's going on with them, being the one to stand up for them. Because like, even though they're in high school, like, they're still kids, they still need someone to do that for them. And a big thing is like for my research on like barriers for Hispanic students, is it's not that parents don't want to either. That's another thing is like, it's not that parents are just like, oh, I don't care. It's that they don't know, like they don't know how to help them either. And so kind of thinking about not only advocating for their student, but for their families too, a lot of times, especially for like marginalized and underrepresented groups, like advocating for those families, like, hey, if they come to parent teacher conferences, how are they going to communicate with the counselors? How are they going to communicate with teachers? And saying something, because then it's like a shift of blame always of like, oh, it's the parents, no, it's the teachers, no, it's the students, and kind of just like everybody supporting each other and like advocating again for the students and be like, how can we best create the best learning environment for them and help them be the most successful? And for that, I truly do think it's advocating for them.
That's so insightful. So much to chew on there. But for the sake of time, I'm going to move to Olivia. But I really love this idea of advocacy, of anticipating the needs and putting in and filling in that gap. Olivia.
Yes, I had a really similar experience at my school. I taught a lot of seniors, and there were a lot of students that had been accepted into college or like had been applying and got accepted towards the end of my time at my internship. And I had the opportunity to just like sit with them like during project work days or whenever I had a moment and like actually help them enroll in classes at the U of A, because they just were really frustrated and like didn't have a counselor at the U of A. And then there are only 2 counselors at my high school. So they, of course, are super busy and have a ton of students who have a ton of different needs. And so I'm like, well, the least I can do is try and help you like enroll for classes or figure out your FAFSA. But I think that like that's just one example of how we get to advocate for our students. And a lot of that comes back to like building that relationship with them. I had a student, like, I think my second to last day, who was talking to me while I was doing like the carpool line. And we were just talking, and that student opened up about how they like basically had nowhere to go after graduation. And like there's like family stuff going on, and there's just, they like can't get a job, can't find somewhere to go. And I don't think that that conversation would have happened if I hadn't built that relationship with that student. And then I got to talk to the counselor and connect that student with some more resources because I just didn't know very many of them. And I think that's another really cool example of just like I could have heard that and be like, oh, like what a bummer. Like, man, I really hope something works out. But like I would be I would not be stewarding my position as an educator well if I didn't like take the information that students like in confidence shared with me to try and help them, whether that is college applications or living situation or jobs or whatever it is. Like, I think that students sometimes don't have anyone else to confide in. They don't have anyone else that they can trust. And so if you end up being the person as an educator that students trust in, but hallelujah, like how are you going to actually help them through whatever they're going through? So I think I think teaching is very active, and like we have such a big responsibility, and it's so important and it's so special. And like I talked about this earlier, but you could so easily take like the passive road and be like, oh, like I'm just here to teach. Like my job is just to teach you, and that's it. And I clock out at 4 p.m. and I'm done. But the reality of actually like caring for your students well is doing more than what's asked of you as an advocate. So
That's good. That's good. I hear relationship being the foundation of advocacy, and also being in informal spaces outside of the classroom to allow some of those needs to become apparent. Thank you. Trevor, how about you?
Yeah, I don't have a ton to add on. I think they all hit it pretty good, but I think something that's coming to mind for me is if the students feel that support from you, I feel like support is advocacy in itself. And I feel like, these students, they, at least when I was a student, I looked up to my teachers because they're in society, they're doing all this. So I feel like if they can feel supported and they can trust us, then they can know that we're going to advocate for them. And I think that all just goes back to building that relationship, kind of like you were saying, and then just forming that relationship so that they can trust you to advocate for them, and they can trust that you got their back. And the more we can learn about our students, the more we can learn about their cultures and being responsive to that. I think that gives us more opportunity to be the advocate and to speak up, in our staff meetings or in our school in general. It just creates so much more opportunity to be able to be that voice, because your students at the end of the day, and knowing your students just creates that opportunity. So
That's awesome. Well, you all students are incredibly lucky to have such a growth mindset, mirror windowing, uh, loving, considerate teachers. And I'm glad that you found these qualities and characteristics in yourself in your teaching internship. And I hope that you'll carry it forward. I encourage you to write down your experiences because, and I'm glad that you guys saw that this was important enough for you to be here and to do this, because this will be a time period in history that will be something folks are learning about in the future, and your voices will contribute to that. And your voices are powerful and full of love and full of empathy and full of growth and compassion for your students, which I believe is the hallmark of any good teacher. And as you go forward, I know that culturally responsive teaching, especially dealing with groups of people that you may not have a lot of knowledge, cultural or historical knowledge about, can be intimidating. But no, the basis of culturally responsive teaching is that curiosity, that empathy, that respect for humanity. And if you have that, that is the core of being culturally responsive, because that means you will take the lens of, I want to know more, I can know more so that I can do more and my students can be more. So congratulations on completing your internship. Congratulations on graduation happening in a few days, and congratulations for the jobs and the teachers and the youth that you're going to impact and influence in the future. Thank you so much.
From our discussion with our pre-service teachers, we've learned that culturally responsive teaching was a necessary practice for pre-service teachers to serve students of diverse disabilities, linguistic backgrounds, races, ethnicities, as well as home lives, and that they implemented these practices spontaneously at different points, such as in their classroom environment, their curriculum and instruction, or their advocacy on campus, showing that culturally responsive teaching and teacher education is a very important intersection that we must engage pre-service teachers to prepare them for America's classrooms.